Hello, hello and welcome to this video, chess opening Q&A 3. Thanks a lot for the great positive feedback on this new series. I got tons of questions in video number 2. And also it seems that I was skipping some of the questions in the video before. That wasn't willingly, I somehow overlooked them, and I think some, like 2 or 3, now might have been somehow deleted in the first one. So there seems to be have been a question about Catalan move orders that I kind of remember that I saw it, but then I didn't, and well, somehow that went under. So if I'm not answering a question, I'm going to tell you in the video why and what you could possibly rephrase or be more precise or something. I wouldn't just ignore a question. So if you feel it can be answered, sorry, just put it in again and I'll try my best. I also have to think about the format, if it's a good idea to do that in the comments in YouTube, because it can be quite irritating probably. Like if there are 10 videos, people will post questions in earlier videos, and I try to disable the comments, but then you don't even see them anymore. And this is also it doesn't feel right. Yeah, they should be visible, but I don't think you can make the ones visible that are there and still block new ones. So I have to think about it. So until I have a great technical solution, new questions just in the latest video like this one now. Okay, let's get started. I won't manage all the questions. I know that this is not possible, but I will do most of them and then get some of those questions answered in a separate video, probably number 4. And I don't want to wait longer than a week, so I want to make one video a week at least of this format. So first one by I think the JJO. In the Nimzo-Indian, what are the pros and cons? Let's put the Nimzo on the board. The Nimzo-Indian, what are the pros and cons of castles or c5 versus e3 and queen c2? Okay, first of all, the nature of those moves is quite different against those two white replies. The big difference is that after queen c2, c5, white is almost forced to fight for an advantage by taking. Every other move doesn't really help a lot, as e3 is not a great combination. For example, black will often take and get into an IQP type of position where the queen is prematurely placed on c2. So after c5, white is usually capturing. And this is fundamentally different from castles, where, for example, after a3, which is the most popular move, it is rather difficult to play c5 at all. You can prepare it with d6 or b6, but now you simply cannot play the move. White is taking. So here, c5 and castles are two fundamentally different lines. They could transpose into one another in case of castles, knight f3 or bishop g5, and then c5. As again, white is more or less forced to take, and then you get the same structure. So there are some transpositions, but still there's a fundamental difference, in particular after castles a3 takes. This is something that is just different to c5 before. However, against e3, the Rubinstein, castles and c5 is heavily transpositional. In particular, if you castle intending to play c5, d5 stuff next, then it can easily transpose. There are, however, some move order details. The main one is that after c5, white has to reply knight g2, which nowadays is believed to be the most testing probably, where either after a later a3 you have to retreat or give up the bishop pair, with white being able to capture with the knight on e2. So basically after c5, knight e2, it's a bit difficult to retreat your bishop on that normal diagonal, while after castles, knight e2, if white tries the same, you have a multitude of options where after the main move d5, you can actually go back. So there is a difference really here in terms of move orders and in terms of what you do against, in particular against knight e2. There is a difference. In my book, by the way, I have a recommendation to castle here because I want to retreat the bishop back. I don't like c5 92 so much. And after queen c2, I have an entirely different line recommended with knight to c6. However, I believe that castles and d5 are perfectly valid and maybe even objectively a little bit better. Okay, I hope that helped. The next question is by Richard Bedford, and he asks, he is asking about this opening, the Nimzo-Indian defense with e5. First of all, I would like to mention that if you, I mean, he asks for the black side here, but I want to mention that if you are white and somebody plays knight c6, I recommend to just play knight f3. I think this is just a better move than d4, because here you most likely will transpose after e5, and anything else is probably just better for white. And this is a position that you probably play anyway. So I recommend knight f3. Anyway, after d4, Richard asks about the move e5, and now he says that he likes the position after d5. That I do understand. That is an interesting play. You go to g6 and get this out. That makes a lot of sense. But he says that he doesn't like d takes e5. And after knight e5, knight f3, it seems difficult to equalize or to get to a clear picture what to play. I do agree. I looked at this a little bit, and I never did before. And I don't quite see something great that you can do. I mean, I'm not saying you're in terrible shape, but I'm not really happy with black's play here. Something that you can do, but is probably not to your liking, is d6. That's probably the most solid move. But after knight e5, I mean, if white does that, and I'm not saying that's best, but this is something that is quite uninspiring. Yeah, I don't think white has much, but still. It's not much fun, and I think you play knight c65 maybe also to get a bit of, off the beaten track. What I thought is quite reasonable, however, is taking in queen f6. I think white is better, but it's not terrible, and very likely white has no clue about this line. Or I think what Miles himself did, he's the inventor of this line. He played this continuation. This also should be it shouldn't be a huge advantage for white. I don't think you can equalize completely in the whole line, but this also seems quite reasonable. I probably would check this, because here, I mean, the queen trade is really harmless. And you can, for example, something like that is quite interesting, where some people might exchange queens or so. I don't know. I think black, it does not equalize fully, but you can definitely play the position. I'm not sure how often it is on the board, really. I mean, how often do people take here and play knight f3? I don't really have a statistical idea. By the way, I want to mention, maybe that is not to your liking at all, but I want to mention that I think that this is actually not that bad. What I saw, I saw a relatively recent game in the German Bundesliga, where Rapport played that with this. This was black against Arnold. It had a really okay position, and I think white players will probably have no idea what to do. So maybe d5 is an option. Okay, the next question here by Petricide. Hello. He has a couple of questions, actually. Maybe I should limit it to one per person to make it a little bit shorter. He says, can black equalize in the Alekhine defense main lines? I don't think he can. And I think this is what Patricide is referring to. This is probably the main line. And I don't think there is a clean way to equalize this. However, I think you can definitely make it work for black simply because of non-symmetrical knowledge. White has this on the board maybe once a year in longer time controls. And if you have this like every other game, you can do, I think, quite okay. The lines that I would check here, to be honest, with black, I mean, I think there are lots of lines here that are just a bit better for white. So the choice between lines that are a little bit better for white is actually rather wide. There is a recent book by Alekhine where Kornev recommends to play g6. I don't have that book yet. It is like released, I don't know, a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And I think that is one of the more interesting tries, but I don't exactly know what his recommendation is. That always was believed to be better for white, and I doubt that he can totally change this assessment. However, I don't think that white players know it all that well. The line that I've played quite a bit is bishop g4, bishop e2, and c6. I believe this is also, again, better for white, but people won't know it. It's just my experience. The most dangerous lines are actually with castles, where they really know stuff very well, or some knight g5. And this is really, these kind of things are very murky, and if you know them well, I think you can do okay with black. White might be a little bit better, again, but who knows this stuff? Okay, the second question here by Petricide is about the Slav, and it is about this line, and he asked, why is this supposed to be bad? Top GMs as Feingold regard this as a mistake, but engines don't see a clear problem with it, and it is played by masters. Yeah, absolutely. Wait, knight c3. I think you probably mean this position, right? The moves are a little bit different that he wrote here, and I've got a printout of the questions. I think you probably refer to this position. I hope you do, so that my answer makes sense. The reason why this was regarded as bad is traditionally this move: take, and queen to b3. And it was believed for ages that black basically now has to go back to c8. And this is, well, quite clear that white should be a little bit better. Even that is not much, because you only are tempi up in a totally symmetrical and rather slowish position. But then it was found out that black can actually play this and make a pawn sacrifice out of this. This was even recommended in Boris Avruk's book, The Classical Slav, which was, I think, quite sensational. Yeah, because Avruk, is a top analyst, and if he recommends that for black, there should be something about this. So I don't think there is something fundamentally wrong with this, as long as you're willing with bishop f5. As long as you're willing to play this gambit line. Honestly, I'm not totally certain about the current theoretical state. I couldn't get a clear picture by just looking at it briefly. But this is what black should do then if he goes bishop f5. Should be ready for that. You, however, have to take into account that white does not need to do that. White may also just play knight f3, and then you transpose to a completely normal line. If you, it depends a little bit on your repertoire here, what you want to do. If you play, let's say, a6 Slavs, you can still play a6 and so on. It's not, yeah, there's not a huge upside of playing bishop f5 here, I believe. I don't know. It depends a little bit, again, on your overall repertoire. In particular, if you, if you want to take on c4, that makes sense, yeah, to maybe look for bishop f5 as a sideline. When I was playing the Slav, I was mostly playing a6 line, so it didn't really matter all that much what white did. I was playing a6 here anyway. Okay, the final question here by Petricide is about the Karras attack in the Scheveningen. He says, black hasn't violated any opening principles, but for some reason, white is allowed to seemingly break some by playing g4 and gains an initiative. Today, this is the main move. I'm wondering what concrete reasons make this strange-looking pawn push playable. What concrete reasons? Yeah. One thing you have to see, you said black did not violate any opening principles. Objection. I think he did. Not right, not like in a bad way, but black is not putting any pawn on the 5th rank. Like you can play e4, e5, which if you are on a meta level is probably the better move on the first move. And prevent white from playing d4, make it more difficult, whatever. So black is giving white some leeway in the center. And also you can argue actually that e6 is early. Yeah, you can say, okay, yeah, well, if you go a6 like in the Najdorf, you keep an eye on the g4 square and prevent that. So I'm not really buying that black has not violated any opening principles. I'm not saying he played bad moves, don't get me wrong, but the black play of not really fighting for the center that quickly is provocative in its own right. The main point of g4 is actually, and this is really important to understand, is not just a kingside demonstration, but rather if you push this knight away, there is no pressure on white center anymore. This is also why nowadays the move h6 is almost regarded as the only move that is okay for black. Anything else is rather bad. And what is also important is that you have this typical recipe hitting in the center if they play on the flank, and center moves don't work. E5 doesn't work due to bishop b5 check. I don't want to get into details, but this is good for white. And d5, I think, is just immediately problematic. I think because of taking, yeah. And this is what the engine gives. I don't really know why d5 is bad. I just know nobody plays it. But this looks pretty awful, yeah. So from the black side, you probably have to go h6, and then g4 was really kind of warranted. There are even crazier in crazier positions where g4 is indeed valid. Okay, this video will get long. Okay, the next question is not really a question all that much, but a rather huge and detailed post about sidelines against the Italian. It's a very interesting post by GNG Roulette. This is something that is extremely interesting and that I want to talk about in a separate video. So I have to, I can actually do this, and here I have to make a note. I want to do something separate about it. It's very interesting. Okay, next question by Thomas Herovine. And he says, the reverse Grand Prix is considered to be better than the actual Grand Prix attack. Is this true? And if so, is there some useful way to waste a move? So he's talking about this, not d5, this one, e5. He's talking about this. This is the reverse Grand Prix. And indeed, this has a quite reasonable reputation. And the Grand Prix with white does not have such a great reputation. Why is that? It's also a bit of a matter of perspective. Yeah, if you are white and you play, you rather play for an advantage with white, then the Grand Prix is probably not so great because you don't get any. However, that setup with black, you have a little bit less of an ambition, let's say, and probably are happy with less, yeah, with equal or something that is easy to play. But now the tempo, it's now white's move, and the reason why the reverse Grand Prix sometimes has a better reputation is because white's moves may now have drawbacks. For example, if white plays a normal move d3, then bishop to b4 is quite useful now because it's a pin. Yeah, there is, sorry, I wanted to draw this all the way to the king. It's now a pin, so knight d5 is not an answer. If you imagine it is black's move in the Grand Prix and they play bishop to b5, then the knight jump is the answer, the best move. Yeah, knight to, in that case, d4. And d3 is stopping that. Yeah, white is ridding, or is giving up on that idea. The next point is, if white plays a natural looking move e3, then black has the funky option d5. That looks odd, but takes is actually interesting. This is what I recommend for white, by the way, now to play d3, and I think white still has chances for a small edge, but it's not something extraordinarily great. And now the question was, what should white do with the wasted move? Is there a useful move for white? I've looked, and I would go e3 as mentioned. I think black is, I think white is quite okay if black now plays something else than d5. I think at least you can be happy with the position type if you play English, the English opening. I mean, black can go g6, for example, and you play knight e2, and then you have the option if you want to go d4 or d3. I think that's something that an English opening player should be okay with. And d5, as mentioned, is not that terrible for white. I would yeah, go for something like this, is what I recommended in my English opening repertoire. That's my recommendation. I think there are also ideas like knight f3, but I never looked at that, and I'm not quite sure if this is all that helpful. By the way, a3 to stop this move is answered by g6, and then a3 is of relatively minor importance, so that would be useful. I've seen rook b1, but that is really kind of esoteric, yeah. Maybe playable, yeah. It's such a slowish position that it could be done. By the way, in the Grand Prix, just to complete the picture, yeah, this is the Grand Prix. Here the issue is that if bishop here, then knight d4 is fine, and against bishop c4, e6, knight e7, d5 is fine. You can actually try with white here to play some funky move, like a3, for example. Yeah, and say, okay, this could be useful, and then let's hope for black making a move that is helpful, like d6, bishop b5 or so. Yeah, this is actually quite funky, yeah? But I don't really know against e6 if this is helping. People have tried b4, but okay, we're getting into really really funky stuff. Okay, the next question. Can you recommend something against the Catalan for black? I feel it's always very pleasant for white, I think is what you want to say, and often a game with two results. So something against the Catalan. Yeah, I do understand your point. First of all, there could be two ways to reach that. It could be here, which actually gives you some additional options, like not playing d5, c5, bishop b4 check are reasonable moves. Or we can talk about the Catalan like this, which is probably what most people would have. Yeah, now, recommend something for black here. Honestly, it's difficult. And I think he says it's often a game on two results, meaning that white is pushing for an advantage without risking much, and black is kind of suffering. I do agree, this is often the picture in many lines. I don't have something fantastic to offer here, honestly. It depends a little bit on what kind of risk you're willing to take and what position type you want to play. In general, I think if you ask about what the best lines are, these are probably the ones where black takes on c4, either now or on move 6. And here you have some options that are indeed interesting. For example, if you take here, there is the move queen a4 check. This is, however, a relatively easy equality for black. You can play knight bd7 or c6. Knight bd7 is the main move, and you should equalize quite easily. However, this is not very exciting. It's very difficult to get like a guaranteed excitement with black. I don't actually think it's possible. So this is very solid. However, if white tries bishop g2, then you have a couple of sharper options, moves like a6 or knight c6. There's also the really wacky line, bishop d7 and bishop c6, and now black actually can try to castle queenside and play some h5 stuff. This is sharp, but probably objectively not great. Something to keep in mind. This is what I meant with risking. This is definitely a risky line. What I think is quite reasonable, you can try to keep many pieces on the board with bishop b4 check. and now you have a good choice between both bishop moves. In both cases, you can try a setup that is somewhat like this, and then maybe build up a stone wall. You can also sometimes go knight h5. The stone wall is not unreasonable, and it is somewhat fighting. It's not a very clear-cut position for white where you can like press easily. I think it's complicated, but it's a matter of taste. There are people who downright reject a stone wall due to the square weaknesses, which I do kind of understand if you have that opinion. I don't think it's correct, but it's an understandable opinion. You can also play just the main line, and after queen c2, which is normally done, try something interesting. Yeah, you can try b5 as an interesting move, or b6. This is something that I actually do like for black quite a bit. I think white doesn't have all that much, and it is quite interesting if they play knight e5, and then you can take here and make a sacrifice out of it. I would look in those directions. There you can try to take and search for something really sharp, like what I said with bishop d7 c6. Again, it's probably better for white, but it's sharp. You can play a long closed game with this. I would really play the check and then c6. Don't play the closed without the check. Or some main line with something like this. Here, this has an added benefit in a way that instead of that b6, let's say, is kind of interesting, but not unsound, let's say. And it is still a move that you could play against a strong player who knows his things. So it's a good middle-of-the-road approach that I think is quite reasonable. Still, it is difficult to generate winning chances. This is why the Catalan is just a great opening for white. Okay, the next question by, let's go all the way back, is about the QGA by Fantasy Player. In the QGA with e3, he says he plays e5, but he wonders if bishop e6 is a reasonable surprise weapon. Yeah, I think that probably e5 should be played if you want to avoid the super standard stuff, yeah, which is of course possible. Then e5 should be played. I think e5 is a decent move. We get this position, which is part of my e4 keep it simple repertoire via the French exchange, and I think that white has some chances to play for a slight pull, but due to the IQP there is some imbalance, which makes it also, I think, quite reasonable for black to play. So I wouldn't mind to play that with both colors, if you want to put it like that. The move bishop e6, I think, is a reasonable surprise weapon. It's probably not the best move ever, let's say, but it has some surprise value and will definitely irritate white players. And I don't think there is a super clear-cut way for an advantage. So it is recommended in a book, Chess Opening Repertoire for Rapid and Blitz by Sveshnikov and Sveshnikov. And I don't think they would recommend something that is completely garbage. Yeah, so I think it's not the move that I would play against, let's say, yeah, a very strong GM with good theoretical knowledge. But like in a blitz game, yeah, why not? I've tried it out, yeah, in reasonable, or let's say very similar lines. And the final question here by Fantasy Player, is there still some play for an advantage in the mainline Catalan? I should be able to jump to that position because we just talked about it. He's here, and you know, I think that white always has chances for a slight edge here with all kinds of lines, because I mean, black players don't know the theory perfectly. It's just not, it just doesn't happen. And I think the key to success, as it is so often in main lines, is to be a little bit flexible and vary. Yeah, most of the time black will not go b6 but a6, and then you have like a huge range of lines. You can take on c4 or a4. I would probably go a4 nowadays and try for that, and within this complex you have various ideas, or you can take, and in this position you also have some moves. You have bishop d2, you have bishop g5, bishop f4 mostly, and all these are playable for sure, and I simply don't believe that black players will know everything. Absolutely not. For example, this line is something, if you play against a very strong opponent, you can just play bishop g5 and essentially say, okay, you're not winning anymore. This is something that is also important to know. Yeah? You have options that can be very annoying against strong players, like this here. There's this line where black either is worse or can play for complete equality, but this equality is so complete that black will never win. So this is a line that I always have in my repertoire, just in case if I need to draw against, I don't know, somebody where a draw is fine. Yeah, but it is by the way still a position that you can easily win if they don't know how the equality is actually proven. So there are many options. Again, I would probably recommend to go a4 to be more complicated, but I would just vary, play 2 or 3 lines, mix it up, and I think if you play the Catalan on a good level, you will be able to win games without losing much, which is always a very good percentage play, of course. Okay, I hope that helped. The next question by SG Johnson: how do you handle a knight coming to the e5 square in the QGD, especially early on in the opening? Honestly, I'm not really aware that this happens so often. So I would like an example, honestly, because I'm not really. I mean, you say, let's say this is the QGD, and then a knight coming to e5 early on. It really doesn't happen all that much. There are some lines in the exchange variation where white can post up a knight to e5 and follow up with f4, but that usually means that black has done something wrong. So I need an example, basically, because I'm not really aware of lines where this happens early on. Okay, yeah, just give me some moves, that is helpful. Okay, here the next question by Sean Adams is about the English opening, and he says he had issues in the following line. This knight c3, castles, rook b1. Yeah, this is part of my repertoire. The English repertoire, the English repertoire on Chessable. And I do understand that you say after c6 you came to the conclusion that white is worse. I don't think white is worse, because you can go e4. You can go e4, I think. By the way, I'm just wondering, did I actually recommend rook b1? I'm kind of I think I played, didn't I do this? I think I played d3, yeah? I think I played d3 in my c4 repertoire. I should have looked that up, honestly. The point is the following. d3 is part of white's agenda anyway, yeah? And if now d6, rook b1, any c6 ideas here would be 2 moves, and here you can play e4 and stop him from playing d5. If you play rook b1, c6, e4, there might be d5, because there is this very annoying move with tempo sometimes. Yeah, so for example, take e5, there could be, I don't know, knight e4, and this looks a little bit odd. I think this is the reason why I recommended d3 in this position. And I don't really see a drawback. Yeah? Like after c6, you can play e4, and that fits into the, oftentimes into what white wants to do. And you, I think, avoid business with c6 and d5 that way. Here, if they go d5, I think you can take and go e5. I think I analyzed that in my repertoire. Here, rook b1 would be highly undesirable because of an early bishop f5. I think you should probably go d3 here. My memory serves me correctly. This is what I had in my English repertoire. If that does not fit into your concept, then yeah, I'm not quite sure what pawn structure you're playing for then. Usually with rook b1, d3 is played at some point, so it should work out, I believe. Okay. Oh, no, I should do the right things here. Next question by Adam Rubinson. He says he doesn't agree that the reverse Grunfeld is fine for black. He has won loads of games there with white. Yeah, welcome to the club. I also won tons of games with white there. And what he's talking about is basically the following. I think that what I've said in an earlier video, that black could go for this as an option against the white opening setup. And maybe I should have been more precise. I don't recommend to take now. I actually regard this as a reverse Grunfeld already. Yeah, so maybe the terms were not quite clear. I mean, this is not unplayable, but I don't think it's particularly comfortable for black. But what you can do with black is e6, c4, and now take on c4. This is actually what I was thinking of. Of course, white can take on c5, and it's not very exciting, but I think black should ultimately equalize here. But he has to know stuff. But also white should know some stuff. So it's something that I think you can play for, keeping in mind that not everybody with white plays d4 and knows everything. So I completely understand that you score heavily here. I also do score very heavily with white, but that is usually due to the fact that black players have no clue. But if they have, then I think black is okay. Yeah. The next question by Lieutenant Moustache, and he says he had a question about Bologan's Catalan in the first video. This is something that somehow I read, but then did not have on my piece of paper when I made the video. So I think it was about early g3, early knight f3. I remember something like that. But yeah, just again, put the question in again, and I will look at it. It's somehow that got lost. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I have a printout for all this. Yeah, and maybe it's just a piece of paper went astray or something. Okay, his new question then. He plays the Caro-Kann black and the Slav, and he's following Sadler's Slav book, but got put onto Bologan's Chebonenko Slav book. Do you think the mainline Slav is more appropriate, or the a6 line for a Caro player? Honestly, so what he's saying is, if he should play this or a6. Well, if you have experience with this already, it's probably interesting to learn how often you actually get this on the board. I have no idea how often it is percentage-wise. On a higher level, almost nobody goes into this anymore for white, because it is quite commonly believed that black is okay, and people play early e3. I mean, this is the main line now by a mile on the pro level. I wonder how relevant that is. I don't know, maybe on a club level, people play this a little bit more. What I'm getting at is, you have to know some stuff anyway, like here, or in other lines, like knight c3, e3, where you cannot take. And oftentimes, actually, a6 based approaches do make some sense. For example, against e3, people quite often play bishop f5, knight c3, a6, which has it's kind of a mix, yeah, of a Chebonenko and a classical type, more classical type Slav. And if you have these lines in your repertoire anyway, then looking at a6 on move 4 is not such a huge thing, yeah. And I don't know, I have tried both, and I think it also just makes some sense to play both, just to be less predictable. I don't really have such a clear recommendation about this. Yeah, what I think should be preferable. My experience is that in the Chebanenko, people are less booked up still, even though it is now fairly normalish line. And I think in the Chebanenko, you need a little bit less of concrete theoretical knowledge. In the classical Slav, like here, there are some really deep lines, yeah, with bishop f5 and knight e5 in particular. I don't know. It's certainly okay for black. I mean, as I said, it has a good reputation, but it's quite a workload. I think a6 is a little bit less. Or you consider to play e6, which is actually quite okay. Yeah. It's your call. What you want to do. This is difficult. This is different to the Caro-Kann, however. Okay, the next question is basically the same. The Chebanenko a6 interests Brian here, but he gets lost easily and did not find good study material. I don't think there is a really recent book. The Bologan book is also very old now. And I mean, I probably it's probably still usable, but it is really old. Yeah, there is no recent book about it. There is just no recent book about the Chebanenko. I don't have a book recommendation. What you can do is certainly use databases and online resources to check for recent games and see if somebody is playing it regularly. Back then, when I was studying this a little bit more and played it regularly with black, the main problems here were a4 and c5. And both I felt were still interesting for black. I mean, I wasn't really put off by anything in particular. I was just, as usual, switching around openings. Yeah, I was playing this most of the time. And then I started the Nimzo-Bogo project. And then while practicing the Nimzo-Bogo, I was going more in this direction. But I never had any particular problem here. I think if you study the Chebanenko, I would definitely start with the moves c5 and a4. These will be the most dangerous moves available here. I also have some, I think g3 is also quite interesting, but a4 and c5 will be the moves that you should check mostly. Here Brian also has a question about, he says he plays somewhat passively and he loses many games due to that, several of them where he had an advantage. Any advice to improve on this? This is a bit too general. I mean, you have to see the games, why exactly this happens. If you play too passively if you play too passively when you have an advantage, let's say, I kind of puzzle this together in this way. You have to maybe check what your advantage consists of. So sometimes you have an advantage and you look at the engine evaluation and it says, okay, you're better. And this, however, can be a different kind of advantage. There can be something where you have to find a dynamic resource where it's about calculation and understanding, let's say, how pieces work together. And this is something that can be improved, of course, by learning to calculate better and get a better feel for the initiative. It can often help to study dynamic games, and to be better at that. Or if you say you go too passively, something that might happen to you is if you, let's say you are a material up, a pawn or whatever, a piece to pawn some material, and then you start to be too protective of your material and you turn to more passive play to defend your material. This is something that is more of an attitude kind of thing. Yeah, sometimes you think, okay, now I've done my job, I've got the material, now I just have to defend, and see that I converted. And this is something that I just can say one sentence. You just have to stop it. If you're material up, the main goal that you should have is to use that material to some good. Yeah, like the pawn should control squares, the piece should be active, and so on. And only if you don't see anything great that you can do with your extra material, you should go to, let's say, trades and simplify. Of course, it very much depends on the actual position. There can be this kind of advantage or this other kind of advantage. Yeah. Sometimes you also drift into passive play, not because like you want to, but simply you don't see a good continuation. There is one, but you don't see it, and then you get then let's say your coach, your chess teacher tells you, "Are you playing too passively?" And you didn't really do it on purpose. You just didn't see a good opportunity, and this can be improved upon by being more thorough with candidate moves. Yeah, so that you don't miss an active possibility. Those will often be checks, captures, something forcing. And it's really something that can be improved if you just make this effort every single position to check the active moves first, and only then go to look at more passive moves. Yeah, start with the active moves. That is just my general advice, but it is more it can be more concrete, this advice, if you give somebody your games and like look through them. That is a more thorough picture. The next question by Tommy Videos is good lines against the 4 knights with black, where you can somehow play for a win. And he's asking about this, which is part of my white repertoire for Keep It Simple with the move d4. And honestly, there is nothing great that black can do to play for a win. Something like really aggressive, it's just not there. What I would do with black if I want to win, I mean, if I really must win the game, I don't play 1e5. It's just not the right move to do that. But if I'm in a position where I want to try a little bit, I just don't want to make a simple draw, I want to be a bit more complicated, I would be, I think, looking in the following directions. I would still do this. And here, I would either play this line. I think white is probably a bit better there, but it is a bit more complicated. Yeah, I gave some good advice, I think, for white in my book, but it's not something that white wins or white is like enormously better. It is more complicated. The other thing that you can try is what I recommended for black in the Caruana repertoire, the Petrov-based e4, e5 repertoire. This is, let's say, a bit of a gamble in terms of playing for a win, because there are definitely continuations that are just, again, very drawish. But it can also be sharp or get sharp if white doesn't know it or plays something that is kind of substandard. Yeah, it can be an irritating move. I think you have quite reasonable chances to do something, for example, here. It's still simplified, I know, but I think here you're a little bit better off than in the typical main lines there. If you absolutely want to play e5 and want to go for a win against the 4 knights, I would probably do this. Not thinking that it is fantastic, yeah, but it keeps more options, and you often can go with d6, yeah, keep more pieces on the board. In the Spanish 4 knights, let's go there. In the Spanish 4 knights, my recommendation is bishop c5. Something that I had looked at years ago in my video series on YouTube, but then I analyzed it more for my e4, e5 repertoire, the Caruana repertoire. And I think it's perfectly fine. There are also lines that are on the dry side, but this is just the nature of the opening. Here, the only move that I think that is even more combative is bishop to d6. Yeah, but this it's kind of, I didn't want to recommend it, yeah, in a publication, because it looks a bit too odd for my taste. I don't think it's bad. I've played it with black, but I wanted a more classical move, and this is why I went for bishop c5 for that release. Yeah. That is a reasonably new thing. It was only released in November last year, so I think this is perfectly fine. The move knight d4 is difficult to play for a win, in particular if white only wants to make a draw, and bishop b4 is the same thing. So this is a good middle-of-the-road approach. I think that can be recommended. Okay. So let's see. This video is already long, and I definitely don't want to go longer than an hour. Actually, half an hour was what I wanted to go for. Let me see if I can. I think I can do some quick ones and then put the other question in an additional video. A question here by Gadzinsko. How about the black Medina gambit? I think I've addressed this before. Yeah, I think this is actually important. I think this is a good move, no? So let's say like this. This is a black Medina. Is it too much of a garbage? Yeah, well, I don't really believe it is a good opening, and probably best is to take it. But so I've probably showed that on video, but some years ago I studied it for black via a transposition, and I found that this is a very simple and good reply. It just is my quick fix against the black Medina. So if they take here after e5, black is fine. I mean, not like you're not winning, but you're fine. And the position very often will involve queen trade, which is basically the end of game, yeah, as the black Medina gambit player usually wants to go for checkmate. Yeah, so this is one thing. They can also do this, after which you have a Caro, where f3 is completely ridiculous. You can just play a normal move and be fine. Yeah, bishop c4 they try, then you can play b5, bishop b3, I think e6. Yeah, now e6 as f takes b4 is good for black, and knight takes is terrible because of the check. So honestly, after c6, white is just worse. He can maybe equalize if he's very precise, but I don't exactly know how this is going to happen. So very simple way to play against the black Medina. The next question is about the English opening, and it's about this line. My special line that I've played tons. Yeah, and he says, Hango Kugo says, it works well if the opponent plays g3, bishop g3, e3, knight e2. So he says that here he's doing okay. Probably also thinking about castles h5, which is something that I've had on the board like a million times in my blitz games, and where white is fighting for equality. It's very sharp stuff. Now he says, if the white knight goes to f3 and he plays e3, d4, I have some problems. Any suggestion on how to go against it? This is a very valid question, and it is about move order, a lot about move order. So let's say this is the move order at the very beginning. If they play g3 and bishop c5, I think most of the time people will actually play e3, knight e2. It's kind of this early g3, knight c3 indicates that they are rather after this. But on a more general level, if white plays g3 and you have the bishop on c5, and then they decide to play knight f3 later, yeah, I think what is a good setup is the following: bishop g2, d6, and now white probably would go knight f3, yeah. Then my recommendation is to do the following: a6, castles, bishop a7, and now I guess you think, or you're referring to something like e3. My general approach to this is that black should strongly consider to put a knight onto e7 and not to f6. The idea is that if white plays d4, and most of the time they will do that, you can actually take and later use the knight on f5. I'm a little bit surprised that the built-in Stockfish is so optimistic for white. I really don't think that white is hugely better here at all. So let's say knight takes, and now what I was thinking is to go for a position like that, where you can put the knight onto f5, later rook e8. I think this is quite reasonable. White could be a little bit better, yeah, but I don't think it is something very substantial, and it is a rather complicated position. I like this a little bit more than putting the knight onto f6. However, this is a completely normal position. This is just a normal position and definitely can be played. I would check knight e7. That's what I think is an interesting way to use the fact that the knight is not yet committed there. The next thing, however, could be that you say, well, what if they do this? And this is very interesting. Now, playing with bishop c5, I always thought is terrible, but I'm not so sure anymore. I think that actually black might be able to play that. I recently saw that after e3, d6, d4, bishop b4, that black's position is actually quite playable here. I was surprised. It looks a lot like a Nimzo. For example, after bishop d2 or something, knight f6, oops, sorry, knight f6, queen c2. This is a lot like a Nimzo. Yeah, maybe it is actually an idea for white to play a3 in this position and simply say, okay, I'm not going to allow you to go to b4. But even this has been played. Yeah, black has played stuff like a6, d4, take, and back. I mean, I know it looks odd, but there have been some games and black's results weren't too terrible. This is food for thought. You can, however, for sure just play knight f6 and go to a main line. Yeah. Another recipe is to start with this. After knight c3, do this, which is entirely different. This is what Arnold is playing, for example. And only after g3, play with bishop c5, so that white is committed to g3. This is, I think, quite a clever move order. Okay, I hope that helps a little bit. Next question, by Infinite Flash Chess, a less theoretically known setup against the Grunfeld. Yeah, I guess we are talking about the main move order here. Yeah, the Grunfeld ever a real issue. One suggestion here by Tomek as a direct reply to that is to play bishop f4 based stuff. I agree, this is interesting and something that I do recommend. Play with bishop f4. This is quite a bit simpler than queen b3 setups, what I had in my opening repertoire video from 2011. It's really quite a long time ago. Bishop f4 makes some sense, or I think lines that also could be tricky for black simply because they are not well known could be something like this e3. I know it looks not very active, but okay, e3, bishop g7, and now moves like queen to b3 or knight f3, bishop d2. This could be interesting. I don't think that black players will have lots of knowledge there. For example, after queen b3, they, not saying they have to play e6, but it is probably the best move. And if they don't know this all that well, they might play c6 or something, and white is quite comfortable. I think specializing in lines like that can be quite rewarding. In particular, if you don't play lots of opponents that prepare heavily. Yeah, simply if they have to solve that over the board, it's not easy. For example, there is stuff like e6, queen to a3, and this will irritate black. Absolutely will irritate black. He's fine, but play it. It's not so simple. So there are some lines that are not very theoretical. For example, also here, this is a completely non-theoretical line that can also be played. Knight to c3, bishop e2 castles. and then you just play a game. I mean, black equalizes, but he does so in the Grunfeld anyway. Okay, so yeah, the next question is a bit too long. The next question is interesting. There's one by Lieutenant Moustache again. Yeah, the Catalan question. Yeah, please, if you phrase that again, yeah, the Catalan with G3, the Bologan repertoire, move orders, just put it in again. I'm sorry that you have to do that, but I'm happy to answer it then. But there's an interesting, more general question about, or by Zach Zoto. What are some questions you have to be able to answer if you have thoroughly analyzed a position in the opening? That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if I can answer that. If you have thoroughly analyzed a position in the opening, I think if you look at an opening and you think about adopting it, playing it, what you should be able to answer is, what is the main line? What are the main lines? Why are they the main lines? Why are some other lines not that good? Ideally, if you really want to know what's going on, it is fantastic if you do understand how this opening evolved over time. Sometimes there's a real history, a real story of the whole thing. They tried a certain move order, then they refined it, then they found out that a certain line doesn't work, and you replace it, you improve on it, and this is how lines evolve. If you get to this depth of understanding, you really have a profound knowledge of the opening. What you also should probably know, and is very helpful to know, is who are the experts. Ideally, you are the expert, but you have to work hard on that. But if you really, who are the experts? If you have found out who are the driving forces behind some lines, then you can study the games and you can sometimes just copy what they do. It's enormously helpful. Or you can sometimes just pick up some specific middle game ideas, which is also super helpful. So these are some things that are very useful to know. Also, in many cases, openings deal a lot with move orders. You should be able to understand the move orders. Yeah, for example, I know people who really, let's say, play the Queen's Gambit with any color, and they're not really aware that what are the differences between those two moves, let's say. And they are quite huge in many cases. And if you really have understood the whole thing, let's say, then you can probably tell why would white play knight c3, what is the intention behind the move, or knight f3, what are the ups and downs, or what is the pros and cons of knight f3 compared to knight c3. If you, let's say, if you can be let's say woken up at night 3 a.m. in the morning and put up in front of an audience and explain that, if you can do that, you really have understood the opening well. Okay, now, is there something that I can answer quickly? I don't think. There's a very sophisticated question about the Spanish. And this, okay, I should probably make a separate video there and address the open points. There's some really interesting ones, but it's difficult to get all into one video. So this is already 1 hour long. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have new questions, and I think you probably will have, put them right here as comments to that video. Yeah, and I will definitely check it for the next episode. That probably will be out in roughly 1 week. Thanks a lot for watching.